Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I request everyone to put their phones on silent mode. It is my pleasure to welcome you all this evening to the Indian Council of World Affairs. Her Excellency Ms. Emine Dzhaparova, Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, will shortly deliver a talk on the theme, Russia's war in Ukraine, why the world should care. The order of the program is as follows. The interaction will begin with opening remarks by Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General, ICWA, who will also be chairing today's proceedings. Thereafter, Ms. Dzhaparova will make her presentation. This will be followed by a Q&A session moderated by the chair. May I now request Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh to deliver her opening remarks.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to Sapru House. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Emine Dzhaparova, the first Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, to the Indian Council for World Affairs. She will be speaking about the most important issue of the present times, the situation in Ukraine. Her talk is titled, Russia's War in Ukraine, Why the World Should Care. With this, before that talk, I would like to warmly welcome the heads of mission who are here present today. I would like to welcome the members of the Diplomatic Corps, the former Director General of Indian Council of World Affairs, who also was India's first ambassador to Ukraine, members of the media, and my colleagues. A warm welcome to you as well. The developments in the last 1 year have shown that the Ukraine crisis is not merely a regional crisis. The conflict has, of course, deeply impacted the European security architecture and its immediate stakeholders, but it has had several implications for geopolitics and geoeconomics. Food, energy, and fertilizer prices have risen sharply, and their supply chains have been hit particularly hard just when the economies across the world, especially in the global south, had recently begun to recover from the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, the impact of the Ukraine conflict has been felt far and wide, including in the Indo-Pacific, which has been experiencing rising tensions in the backdrop of the intensifying US-China rivalry. In this sense, the Ukraine crisis has emerged as a point of inflection for the emerging world order. Like many other think tanks, ICWA has been analyzing Ukraine-related developments and their consequences. We are therefore very much looking forward to the talk by Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine. The bioprofile of Deputy Minister Dzhaparova shows the vast experience that she brings with her. She is a journalist, editor, television presenter, diplomat, and politician. She has done a degree in international relations and has many distinguished awards to her credit. Her current responsibilities are equally impressive. She is in charge for the coordination of policy planning, public diplomacy, international organizations, including EU and NATO. She is in charge of the Department for Ukrainians Worldwide and Humanitarian Cooperation, as well as the Department of International Law. Ukraine is an important partner for India. We share friendly relations marked by multifaceted cooperation. Over the last 30 years of establishment of diplomatic relations, bilateral relations between the two countries had made significant progress in the areas of education, culture, trade, and defense. Both are important trading partners and share strong people-to-people ties. As regards India's position on the ongoing conflict, we firmly believe that this is not an era of war. We have called for immediate cessation of hostilities, the need to return to dialogue and diplomacy to resolve the conflict. India shares good relations with Europe, Ukraine, as well as Russia, and advocates for peace and diplomacy among its partners. India has maintained a principled and independent approach to the ongoing crisis. India has also consistently underlined that respect for principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, as in the UN Charter, are essential pillars of the international order. India has called for avoidance of civilian casualties and destruction of civilian infrastructure, and has provided humanitarian assistance comprising medicines and medical equipment to Ukraine. We are grateful also to the government of Ukraine for its facilitation during evacuation of Indian students at the start of the hostilities. Your Excellency, the world is watching this Ukraine situation with concern, and in this context, we look forward to hearing your assessment of the crisis and your thoughts with respect to the likely trajectory in the future. May I now invite First Deputy Minister of Ukraine, Minister Dzhaparova, to deliver her talk. Minister.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Madam Singh, for a wonderful introductory speech with the naming of all what I've been doing in my country, in Ukraine, and it's a huge pleasure for me to be here among diplomats, among journalists, among experts. And let me first of all congratulate you with the 80th anniversary of your institution. I know that you've made a great contribution into what we call expert community and shaping the expert community. You've been always seeking the answers to the most difficult questions that are raising in the world, and I believe that the war in Ukraine and the name of this discussion is also something that we all as a humanity should deal with. I've been asked a very difficult question, in one way difficult. Why the world should matters? I will try to answer this question in like 5-7 minutes of introductory speech, but I really want you to be active in asking the questions, but I think that interactive dialogue would be much of your interest. So the first issue, the first stand is that the war in Ukraine is unprovoked. And it didn't start 24th of February. It started with my homeland, Crimea, where I used to live and I used to be a journalist back in 2014 in February, where we were a neutral country. We never had a discussion about NATO membership back in 2014, but Russia invaded Ukraine and committed the first aggression act. And I remember being as a journalist, there was a very small room at the day of the so-called referendum, which is 16th of March, and I remember as if it happened yesterday. There was a very small room, and it was full of people, journalists, and then the representatives of occupying authorities have been already informing us about the results of the so-called referenda, which was a mere justification of this crime of aggression. And there was a very tiny passage to the scene, and one man came right on this passage, put his tripod, put the camera on the top of the tripod, and started filming. And then the other person came up to him, barely speaking Russian language, and he, in a very polite manner, asked him to move his camera aside so that he would not obstacle the passage. And that man, in a bold manner, in a Russian language, said to him that, this is my homeland now, and don't you dare to tell me where could I film or could not. And I was just standing in a meter behind this man and kind of listening to this conversation, and I was really in a shock, because in this very moment I understood what happened to my homeland. The Russian invader came to my homeland and started dictating what's going to happen in Crimea. So this war started back in 2014, and at the press conference when President Putin was asked if this was a Russian army, he actually lied to all of us. He said, no, these are local people and you can buy a military uniform in any shop. Yes, probably you can buy a military uniform, but you cannot buy weapons. And these people were fully immune and equipped while invading my homeland. So there is one important lesson that we all have to learn, I believe, and it's also important for India to share this lesson that says that whenever impunity is being formed and if evil and aggression is not stopped, it becomes bigger. So this 8 years after 2014, Russia has been using for preparation for the next phase of the war. And it happened 24th of February, and I think that my society and my country was in a way an illusion and we never thought that this attack might happen and this barbaric war that is taking place in Ukraine might happen. So 24th of February was a turning point when the initial plan of Russia was to take control over Ukraine in 7 days. But as a matter of fact, they failed to do so. And I think that they still fail to take control over the whole country in a military way. So at the battlefield, they cannot reach their goals. And I think that the Ukrainian army has proved and destroy this myth about Russia being the second largest army in the world. So going back to this Crimean lesson, I think it's important to know that sometimes appeasement language that sometimes we use is not the right language, because since 2014 we used to find a proper leader or a proper person whom Putin would listen to, or find a proper language that Russia would listen to and understand. But this appeasement brought us to another escalation that Russia committed 24th of February. The war itself is barbaric. When we revealed and deoccupied our territories, now it's more than half, a little bit less than half of the territories have been deoccupied. Like cities like Bucha, Irpin, we were really in shock when we saw mass graves, when we saw civilians tortured to death, when we find cases, and these are hundreds of cases, of women and children raped, even seniors raped. And this brings us to this shock that you cannot imagine it, that it's been happening in the 21st century and it's been committed by a neighboring country, the country that always claimed that we are brothers. So we've been fed up with this brotherhood paradigm for decades, and then when it happens right in front of your nose, I would say, something that happens to your neighbor, when the missiles attack the infrastructure and 60% of their attacks, they hitting the civilian dwellings, as hospitals, schools, residential areas where people live, and this is something that we call a reality of war. But I think that the most amazing thing is the bravery of Ukrainian people, because if you come, for example, to the capital, to Kyiv, you would see how people keep on living. You will see restaurants open, cinemas opened. So the facade of normal life is there, and people do not scare. I mean, we had fears when the war started. It was not obvious that we would resist that long and that we would survive. But now I think that Ukrainian people have no fear anymore. So we understand that this war is an existential war, and the war with neo-colonial ambition of our neighboring leader who questions the very existence of Ukraine. And I think that Indian people can really feel this because you also had this kind of pages in your history. The second part of my speech is justice is important. Because, as I said, Crimean lesson teaches us one thing, that whenever aggression is not brought to accountability, it has a repetition, it becomes bigger. So my country is launching different initiatives that will bring Russia into accountability, be it the ICJ, which is International Court of Justice, the most respectable judicial forum, be it ICC, the International Criminal Court, that, by the way, issued an arrest warrant to the President Putin for committing war crimes in my country, or be it other initiatives that we launch, for example, the tribunal, that is a special tribunal that we think should be launched to punish for the mother of crimes, which is a crime of aggression that happened since 2014. So we really think that justice should prevail, because the multilateral system and the United Nations is in a way incapable to deal with this situation. And we are talking about the P5 country, the country that has a veto right and thus have a license to kill Ukrainians with impunity. So we started this discussion that, first of all, Russia takes the seat illegally, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia just changed the tablet and they just put their name of their country, Russian Federation, instead of Soviet Union, but they did not follow the procedure. There was no discussion in the General Assembly, there was no recommendation of the Security Council, so we believe that it's a legitimate seat, and this veto right that Russia has is a direct license to kill Ukrainian people. So I think that we will push on this narrative, and of course we believe that all countries who care about principles and justice should support Ukraine. The other thing that I would like to mention, and now I'm coming closer to the Indian-Ukrainian relationship, is that, as Madam Singh said, there are repercussions of the war that you can feel even in Indo-Pacific. It might seem very distant. It might seem far away geographically from India. But we see that when it comes to energy prices, when it comes to nuclear blackmail and security issues, when it comes to the very basic thing like architecture of security, norms and rules that have been agreed after the Second World War, when it comes to food security, it's all questioned. And we have this outcome and these repercussions when we all are insecure, because whenever bigger attacks smaller, no one can be secured. So I think that this is about all of us, and we in Ukraine really feel that it's our common responsibility to face this situation and to deal with this. I'm here with one very important message, that Ukraine really wants India and Ukraine come closer. Yes, we have different pages in our history. We had Soviet heritage, and there was a different stage of our relations within the Soviet Union. But now my country is gaining its independence, gaining its identity based on language, which is not Russian language, because we were forced to speak Russian language for decades. But we are striving to get Ukrainian language back, and it's very normal for any society. I know that you also have this rhetorics in your country, like a post-colonial way of thinking that actually made us all sometimes incapable of understanding what we really want. And only now India, I think revealing this, I would say, idea or vision of itself, exactly the same is happening in Ukraine. So we are now capable of being a subject, not the object, of being not a young brother, or someone, as an affiliated country, but really a country that is capable of borning its own vision of itself. So I think that it's time to, in a way, in a good sense, to restart our relationship. And I had wonderful meetings with the governmental officials, with expert community, while we say that India also living in a very difficult conjuncture and also having different neighbors, especially with Pakistan and China, should also be pragmatic and balancing. In Ukraine, all of Ukrainian people are now experts in international relations. They closely watch the comments of different leaders, as well as the Prime Minister Modi, the travels of the National Security Advisor, Mr. Doval, and when he 3 times go to Moscow, of course, it's a matter of question if he would come to Kiev, and we also will be happy to welcome leaders and officials of India in Kiev, just to balance and just to kind of demonstrate pragmatic approach. The war in Ukraine showed that the Soviet military capability is not sufficient enough. I mean, Soviet tanks can be destroyed in 1 artillery shot. So something that is about Soviet heritage is not the sufficient or efficient future. And this is our message, that we have to find technological decisions, and Ukraine can share its expertise because we have the biggest combat expertise as of now. We do different military projects with different countries, as well as with Turkey, the production of drones, with the usage of technology that Ukraine shared with Turkey, and the engine technology that we shared. So this is what we also can do with India. And to conclude, today India plays a very important role in the world, not only in Indo-Pacific, not only in the global south. The presidency in G20 not only makes it a kind of a president, right, but also brings additional responsibility. We feel that Ukrainian agenda is something that impacts the whole world because it's a litmus paper that shows all of the drawbacks and flaws of the international system and incapability to protect sovereign countries whenever it's attacked by a stronger one. So I think that India may take also this leadership by involving and engaging Ukrainian agenda into discussions that would take place at the side events or sidelines or the events dedicated to the G20 or within summits of G20. So I think that my message here to the officials and to you is that let us make Ukraine more visible in India. Let us help Ukraine to tell its own story. Let us also bring India closer. We have lots of students of India in Ukraine. We used to have more than 20,000 of medical university students. Because of the war, now there is an online possibilities for the students, but we believe that people-to-people contact is the best way how we can communicate. And to conclude, finally, a couple of months before the full-fledged invasion started, we opened a monument to Mahatma Gandhi since 150 years of his birth. It was a very, I would say, emotional moment for myself. I was invited to be a speaker from the Ukrainian government, and I think that the heritage of Mahatma Gandhi is very acute in Ukraine when it comes to my people, Crimean Tatars, who have been deported in 1944 by Stalin decision when every second Crimean Tatar died in exile. And then for decades during the Soviets, Crimean Tatars have been fighting for the right to return to their homeland, and they used satyagraha, Mahatma Gandhi's heritage, by fighting for their rights without violence. And our leadership have been constantly saying that we have to fight for our rights without stepping on the rights of others. So India, in many ways, has a lot in common with Ukraine. And I think that it's a very huge and untapped potential for our bilateral relations, and I hope that my visit is only a start of that deepened and intensive dialogue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Minister. You have given a very detailed view of what is happening in Ukraine, and of course also touched on India-Ukraine relations. And I know that you have agreed to take questions. So I also know that we just have about 20-25 minutes for questions. So I'll immediately take the first round of questions, 3 questions at a time. So I see a hand going right at the back. So we start from the back since the mic is there, and then we'll move.
Hi, good evening. I would like to know that since the war began, there has been ever increased polarization. So I have 2 questions really. The first is the pessimistic one, that do you think the United Nations has become weak and irrelevant, and why not have an end to the arms race and move towards disarmament? Second positive question is that with the biased opinion even in the media, do you think at the local community level and citizen media level we can bring about a change? Thank you.
The second question I'll take from this side. In the front, yes.
Hi, Minister, I'd like to know what role would you like India to play in the cessation of violence, between Ukraine and Russia?
I think I have a, okay, right there we have a question.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for a very moving presentation. I'm sure during your short sojourn here, you would have noticed that a lot of sympathy for Ukraine, a lot of concern about what's happening there. The question is how do we proceed further on this issue? I just wanted to understand from you, because of experience, how the circumstances leading to, the Minsk II agreements were signed. The question was as to how they are to be implemented. I just want to understand your assessment as to why that implementation could not take place. And the second question is that also with the outbreak of conflict and hostilities, there were, I think, 2 rounds of discussions between Ukrainian negotiators and Russian negotiators. Can you give a little assessment as to really, what they were like, and do you see any prospect along those lines? Thank you.
What I'll do is I'll request Minister to answer this set of questions, and I'll take the second round of questions.
Yeah. I have 3 questions, and I will try to be brief. So the first, the United Nations as irrelevant, right, to deal with the situation like we have in Ukraine. Yes, indeed, we see the weakness of the system. We see, and we obviously need the reform of the Security Council, but it's a never-endless story. We've been discussing the reform of UN Security Council for decades. So the question is that, is it in our hands as humanity to do so without the Third World War? It's a huge question. And we are frank in saying so. We don't know where we would be like in a month or in a year as a humanity, as a country. But we believe it's a frank conversation saying that United Nations should be reformed, that veto right, that some troublemakers, and Russia is obviously an elephant in China house, they should be brought to accountability. But I think that it's also a common responsibility, as well as India's responsibility as a country that is playing a bigger role than other countries, right? That is physically one of the biggest countries in the world, that is one of the biggest economy in the world. So it's kind of also to deal with this based on principles. The biased opinion, does it make change? Our president says that extraordinary times need extraordinary decisions. I think that Ukraine today demonstrates super bravery, super resistance, and creativity. I think that this matters and this changes a lot, because when the war started, we didn't have that much support as we now have. It was not obvious that we would have weaponry that we need. There were many discussions and negotiations with Western countries, including the United States, about the systems that we need, but we didn't get positive response up till Bucha happened, for example. And then Ukraine was always pushing, saying, look, it's again a common responsibility, but only after Ukraine made it happen, made it kind of with its own example, not like the Afghan army ran away from Talibs, even being 3 times bigger than Ukrainian army and being better equipped. But Ukrainians stopped Russian tanks with their bare hands, and only after this amazing bravery, the world started to support us. It was not at the beginning. So I think that public opinion means, and I think that the biggest change that President Zelensky's leadership demonstrated is when he started to talk directly to the people, not to the politicians. He spoke to the parliaments, he spoke to the universities, he spoke to, I mean, in hundreds of his interviews, when he said that it's about all of us, and then Ukraine became a part of domestic election process. So now we have a lot of leaders who come to Ukraine and then report to their people about the results of their visit, and now it's a part of their domestic election process, and this is exactly how it should be, so really public opinion matters. The role of India in resolving the war. Yes, we see the role of India as Vishwaguru, like the arbiter of the world. This is the homeland of many of spiritual leaders, and for example, I've been in India many times, visiting Puttaparthi, which is a small village near Bangalore, with my beloved guru, who is Sri Satya Sai Baba, and I think that this heritage is very important to the whole world. And this is that India can naturally bring, but then the basis of any spiritual teaching is justice. Without justice, we will not move forward. Without, love as a only one way how we can communicate with each other, but sometimes we have countries who choose war instead of love, instead of friendship, instead of neighborhood. And we have this kind of country. So I think that it's about all of us to deal with this, and India as a Vishwaguru can play a bigger role and a greater role in also this. We also welcome any effort that is directed at resolving the war. We are the most interested country to stop this war because our people have been killed, our infrastructure have been damaged. But then the tricky issue is that what would be the basis of this negotiation? Let us imagine that someone, third country, attacks India, and India is a house with many rooms. So they occupy several kind of rooms, and they say, well, now let us negotiate. And here I go to this Minsk agreement question. When they occupied Donbass and Crimea, they first violated hundreds of multilateral and bilateral agreements with Ukraine. It was a very obvious act of aggression. And then they say, well, let us agree. And they forced us because Ukraine was weak enough those days. We had lack of leadership. We didn't have strong army those days. So we signed up to the Minsk agreement, but the whole philosophy of Minsk agreement was either you take the line of Russia or nothing is there. And they've been blackmailing not only Ukraine, but also the whole world, always raising the stakes with Minsk agreement. But the philosophy of Minsk is actually, they first occupied several rooms in your house, and they said, let us now deal and legitimize this occupation. But now it doesn't work, because after 24th of February, this logic cannot be applied. And any peace negotiation that would be performed by different countries and maybe performed by different leaders, and we welcome these initiatives and efforts, should be based on justice. And this is something that my president announced and vocalized with his peace formula. These are very simple 10 points, and this should be the only ground for any negotiation. Because let us imagine that Putin achieves his goals. Believe me, the resolution of the war that would be grounded on unfair and unjustful basis would be only the prolongation. We would obviously have another phase of war, and it might be bigger. And it might not be only about Ukraine. We have many other countries who are a direct target for Putin's ambition and his perverted way of thinking. Georgia, Moldova, and many others. And believe me, others also watching, other leaders, when they see that impunity is allowed to one leader, it means that impunity might be allowed to another one. So this may be multiplicated. So it's really, really a tricky thing. An Istanbul negotiation, indeed, there was a first group and kind of first rounds of negotiation that started in Belarus. By the way, it's public now, but when the first Russian group came to Belarus, they put the maps in front of the Ukrainian delegation and they publicly said, we're going to kill you. We will kill you here and there, and they pointed the positions where they wanted to kill us, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen because Russian army was not that strong as they claim it to be strong. Then Istanbul and Antalya, right? And then other initiatives that came up. But we now see and understand that Russia has been only using it as a facade. They publicly say we are eager to negotiate, but in fact they are not. So the only way how we can get this eagerness to speak is demonstrating success at the battlefield. It may sound illogical or irrational, but it is as it is. So you have to first demonstrate your force, your ability, your capability, your strength, and then, because the country or the system and the regime that projects power understands only the language of power. They take this appeasement language as weakness, and we all did it since 2014, but believe me, I mean, we and our European partners did our best to talk to Putin, you know, to make him consider that or that position, but he took it as weakness, and this was a huge mistake. So now we are correcting this mistake, and the only way how we can make him hear or be eager to talk is the success of Ukrainian army. We are now preparing for the counteroffensive. It might start in the middle of spring, and we believe that if it's successful, we might start another round of negotiation, because it's normal when you have both military actions and negotiation process. So let us wait and see the outcome of the counteroffensive.
Thank you, Minister, for those answers. There are many hands up. So what I'll do is I'll start with Ambassador Devre. He was our first ambassador in Ukraine, Ambassador Devre. And then I'll take a question, then one from the back I'll take.
Madam, it's a pleasure to welcome you in India, the first visit of an Ukrainian minister since the war started. Well, I had the opportunity to be present at the time of Ukraine's independence, and I have seen at the dawn of independence the determination of the Ukrainian people for freedom and independence. And as I see from your speech, that you do not want to be an affiliate, I think very rightly put, of any country, younger brother and so on. Well, we all are greatly disturbed by the war which has been going on, raging for now 14 months, the enormous destruction and so on. And we all would like to see that war ends as early as possible. As our Prime Minister said, it's not an era of war. The question is, this impasse between Russia and Ukraine seems to be almost unbridgeable. I mean, both sides are having their own strong views. Both armies are facing each other. What is, in your view, the possible solution? I mean, of course, you would like to see, in accordance with the 10-piece formula of the president, withdrawal of the Russian forces from all these territories, and the Russians are not likely to give up. So, in this situation, does the world now going to see again continuation of this horrible war?
Here, right in the front, here.
Good evening, ma'am. Sridhar here from the Asian Age. Ma'am, your foreign minister last year had, he was very upset with India for, he in fact said that India is, what shall I say, gaining from the miseries of the Ukrainian people by its import of Russian oil. 4 or 5 months down the line, are you a little more understanding of the Indian position? And also there have been reports of the military relationship between Pakistan and Ukraine, and we have had a very troubled relationship with Pakistan, as you also pointed out. How would you look at this? Thank you.
There are many, many hands up, but I'll take one with the pencil very high.
Thank you. Yes, welcome, Ms. Premier. Yes. True is, in English, blue is true. We truly believe your side of the story, and we as Indians, peace-loving, we want to have a peace. See, your perseverance shows the world that new world order is emerging. Okay, so would you like to, you are inviting Ajit Doval, would you like to visit Beijing, because he wants to trade? China is one of your trade partner. China has built bridge between Riyadh and Tehran. So would you like to the Beijing to intervene, because we want, as the ambassadors, and I'm sure that Mr. Thakur Singh will also agree that we want peace. Ultimately, Taiwan issue and climate crisis, number of the world has to, our priorities are much worse than this, and this affects the whole world. So, Beijing and Ms. Crimea.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, Minister, the floor is yours.
Okay, so about the continuation of war and Prime Minister's words in Samarkand that this is not the era or epoch of the war, we do accept it, we do share it fully. Instead of coping with the COVID repercussions, instead of dealing with climate change, gender equality, and those global agenda issues, we have to pay attention to the war, and it's a war of attrition. It exhausts all of our resources that were supposed to be directed to the fight with hunger and poverty and those things that we all share as humanity. But instead, because some countries have this ambition to invade other countries, to control other countries, we have to deal with these issues. And then when someone says both sides have their own vision, yes, of course, all of the sides will always have their visions. But now, and in our case, and I think it's clear to all of us here in this room, we know who is the victim and we know who is an aggressor. You cannot say that the abuser is also a side, someone who has a vision. I mean, it's clear to name spade a spade, because if we don't do so, we are trapped to misinterpretation, and then on the top of this misinterpretation, you can always put other aggressions. Really, it's important to see the objective line, because, for example, within 1,500 years of Ukrainian history, Ukraine never attacked neighboring country. We are not an imperialistic country. I think that Ukraine proved to be a peace-loving country for many years. We never had any terrorist attacks, even though we have over 130 nationalities living in Ukraine, with 1,500,000 of Muslim community in Ukraine, but we never had terrorist attacks. So I think that the image of Ukraine that Russia is trying to depict, saying that Ukraine is a failed state or Ukraine is a Nazi country or a fascist country, it's not true, and it's crucial to be clear about naming things. And of course, if the era of war will be over, it's about all of us to stop it. Ukraine, if you compare with Russia, will always have less soldiers, less resources, less weapons. But I believe that with the help of international community, those countries who care for principles and justice, we can win. And we should not be afraid of dealing with this situation. About the words of my boss, I'm not in the position commenting the words of my boss. I'm a diplomat. But the only thing that I want to say is that India may play a greater role. We respect the decisions of sovereign country, India, to build up relations with other countries. It's about you to decide, it's about you to benefit, it's about you to construct. But the message of Ukraine is that there should be consideration of pragmatic approach. And then being with Russia, and we are again very sincere saying so, is actually being at the wrong side of the history. So kind of supporting Russia and being with Russia means that it is to be in the middle evil visionary picture of the world. So I think that your country is now also going through a dynamic change in all of the spheres. India has been actively building up everything, society, economy, like everything. So I think that it might also take some time to build up new relations with Ukraine, and I think that it should be based on a pragmatic and balanced approach. new world is there, and if China can play a role, well, yes. Well, for example, China and Ukraine have strategic partnership. But sometimes we feel lack of contact between China and Ukraine that might be proper to that strategic partnership. We know that China presented its vision. Usually people call it peace formula or peace proposal of China, but we don't see it as a peace formula because it's a position of China on the situation in Ukraine. It has several very constructive elements that we do fully agree and share, but some of them are not perfect, I would say. And I think that the basis of any peace vision should be the following. Territorial integrity and sovereignty is a sacred thing. So this is what Ukrainian president is very clear about.
My question on Pakistan.
Yeah. The Pakistan, first of all, the relationship with Pakistan never kind of directed against relationship with India. So it's not something that inter-excludes itself. I know that there are some sensitive messages about military contracts, but let me reiterate that we had contracts since 90s, like 2 decades ago we had several contracts. But now because of the war, for objective reasons, everything that we produce go to the war. Some of the contracts that we signed up to many years ago are not there. So I think that the suggestion that I brought is to have better and deeper relationship with India. And it needs reciprocity. I mean, we knock the door, but it's also up to the owner of the house to open up the door. So here I am with my visit. It's again the first official visit since the start of the full-fledged invasion. We hope that your officials would also come. And I commend my invitation to Deputy Minister Verma. I had a wonderful meeting with State Minister Meenakshi Lekhi. She's a very cordial lady, and I hope, and the messages that I brought to the table was that let us intensify the dialogue. Please, you're most welcome to visit Ukraine, and we also expect the visit of Mr. Ajit Doval, because both of our leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Zelensky, entrusted Doval and Yermak, who is the head of the presidential office, to coordinate the special security mechanism, and I think it's a right time to do so.
Thank you, Minister. We do have time for another round of questions. So let me... Okay, there's a hand up here. There's a hand at the back, 2 ladies, and then I'll take one, and one back there. 3.
Here, Deputy Minister, this side. Here.
Yeah.
So, as you said, this is the first official visit from the Ukrainian side since the start of the war. It's taken you all 14 months to come to India, whereas the Russian side, if I just compare, there have been 2 visits by the Minister Sergei Lavrov. Is your visit marking a sort of shift of the Ukrainian stance so far? Because, as my colleague Sridhar mentioned, some of the statements appeared to show that Ukraine was upset with India's stand. Does your visit mark a shift? Is there better understanding? And has mediation, India's role that you are constantly talking about, a bigger role, are you specifically looking at mediation? Did you bring that up? Did India say anything about that?
There at the back.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your talk. I'm Dr. Stuti Banerjee from the Council. My question is, how do you assess the United States' role in the crisis? And with respect to NATO, how do you judge the US-NATO-Ukraine relations, given that Ukraine's entry into NATO is slightly problematic and is facing roadmaps? Thank you.
And a question at the back.
Hi, ma'am. Siddhant from Vion. My question to you is, India is the president of the G20 grouping. So what are your expectations from India as the G20 grouping chair on resolving the conflict? And can we expect President Zelensky to address the G20 grouping, the summit, when it happens in September?
Minister?
Okay, yeah. Well, commenting the visits of Russian officials here, I would say that obviously they have objectively more time to do so because we are under the war and we have to defend ourselves, and it's our sacred right to do so according to the Charter of the United Nations. And it's really a matter of objective reason that sometimes we cannot pay visits that often as we want it to be. My visit is a mark of friendship and is a first step towards, as we believe, the better and more intensified dialogue with India. But I think that is, as I said, it really needs reciprocity. It's like with NATO, you know, this open door policy. Sometimes it's not enough to just open up the door. First, you need to open up the door, but then you have to enter and to do something. So, of course, we believe that we can start with certain steps, and this is what I've discussed with my colleagues. It's not a public information, but I hope that it might become a practical implementation of what I brought as my agenda. The crisis issue. Well, first of all, let me correct you. It's not a crisis. It's not a situation, as sometimes we can hear. It's a war. Let us refer to this situation as a war. The role of the United States is huge. We see it as a tremendous and essential help that we have, because without this help, but not only United States, we have UK, we have EU countries, we have Canada, we have Australia, we have a bunch of countries that help us. Without this help, we can clearly say that we would not survive. But as I said, and do not take it, and we don't take it as granted, first days of the war, it was not obvious that we would have this help. It's not, because I know that in India, this narrative that this is the war between Russia and United States, or between NATO allies and Russia, we don't accept this narrative because it's not true. Because when country invades you, and then you are in a position to be much weaker than the country that invades you, what are your chances to survive? Of course, you would hold to any support that is coming to you. You would appreciate any assistance that comes to you, because your task is just to physically survive. This is where we are still now, to physically survive. So the role of Western countries, I would say, NATO countries, is tremendous. The NATO issue, and again, the Russian propaganda narrative is there, as if Russia attacked Ukraine because Ukraine wanted to join NATO and NATO wanted to get Ukraine. Look, in 2014, when they invaded my homeland, there was not a discussion about NATO. There was no decision to enshrine in our constitution foreign policy goal to be a member in EU and NATO. It only happened in 2019, and by the act of aggression, I believe that Russia boosted this process, because now, for us, there is no interpretation whether to be with the East or to be with the West. The only way how we can secure ourselves is the integration into EU, which is a matter of time, and integration into NATO, which is also a matter of time, I believe, because NATO will be interested in having Ukraine because we have this expertise and we can contribute a lot with just having the army that has a combat experience. And these are two different things, of having an army that has no experience and army that has been fighting with a huge army for a year. So I think that NATO membership for Ukrainian society is now a solved question. When it comes to the will of Ukrainian people, it's there. All of the surveys, they demonstrate that the majority of Ukrainian people, they want to become a member of NATO. 93% of Ukrainian people, they want to become a member of EU, which is unprecedented. And we never had these numbers and such a unanimity in Ukrainian society. And this is also an outcome of the war. Let us be clear about this. No, I have to go.
Well, I know Minister is running
just
out,
one question here.
G20 question.
G20 question.
And then the next round.
It's a very important role that India is now playing, presiding in G20. Our expectation is again quite clear. We believe that discussion about economy and the future economy and economic situation in the world is not possible without frank discussion about the repercussions of the war of Russia against Ukraine. Because it has an impact to the economic growth, it has an impact to the economy and economies of G20. So our message and my message today in India with all of my visits is let us consider the participation of Ukrainian officials at the events of G20, be it side events or the summits that will be gathering soon. The one on the parliament level, the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament would want to participate. The September summit that would take place here in New Delhi, I believe that my president would be also happy to speak up on behalf of Ukrainian people and to also explain what is the impact of the war to the world economy as well as to the Ukrainian economy. So I think that frank discussion and engagement of Ukrainian profile into the G20 summit is something that would be of good decision, of right decision, and of justful decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Now the last round of questions. I will.
Can I take the question from the lady?
You take a question from here.
I've heard the First Lady on the television. She comes out as a very intelligent, professional lady. Is there a role that she plays in this war? Does she have an opinion? Does she influence her husband? She's a very
yes, she did. Yes, she does. Look, our First Lady is a tremendously strong lady. She really turned out to be a wonderful wife of her husband, even though she publicly says that she never wanted her husband to become a president. Moreover, she never wanted to be a wife of the husband of the president in times of war. Because instead of, visiting wonderful cultural events, she has to speak about the war, about the kidnapped children, about 10,000 of civilians who have been killed, about 8 million of Ukrainian people who left the country, and these are mostly children and women. And there is a huge problem of separation of families when husbands are in Ukraine, their kids and wives are somewhere, all over the world, spread and rummaged. So it's a huge trauma for the whole society, and I don't know honestly how many years we will need to recover this trauma. So our First Lady is actually dealing, and we all, even like Ukrainian diplomats are not those who are at the receptions with the champagne, we are multifunctioners. We are now experts in nuclear weapon, we are experts in weapons, in tanks and armored vehicles and multi-launch rocket systems. We are expert in generators, energy supply, in infrastructure. So this is what our First Lady is also dealing with as an agenda. And by the way, I think that there is a huge potential for the cultural cooperation. This is what I also discussed with my colleagues. There are many prominent Ukrainian poets, artists who are unveiled in India, and we hope that these steps, to tell our story might also be there. Our First Lady is dealing with one of the projects that is called Bookshelf, which means that she brings Ukrainian books to the central libraries of the countries, and we believe that we might open a Ukrainian bookshelf in one of the national libraries of India. So I think that besides the war agenda, there is a lot that could be done in terms of something that usually First Ladies do.
Thank you for that very pertinent question, but now I'll go into the next round. Oh, it's very hard to. Okay. We start here, and then I'll take one at the back. Is there anyone on this side? And one on this side. So let's start with. Where's the mic? Here's the mic.
Thank you very much, Excellency. You spoke of war. I'm a military man and I get my pension now also for war. I can say it's very, very difficult to come to a solution on the battlefield. I've been posted in Vietnam, where it took 10 years to negotiate, ma'am, and Henry Kissinger himself had been a soldier, and 10 years in Paris they negotiated. All that I would say, you used a very good word, nuclear blackmail. I think it's high time. There's nobody who understands Russia better than Ukrainians. I was posted in Hanoi, and half the people were married to Ukrainian ladies. I'm telling you, even the DA was married to a Ukrainian lady. He was a colonel. So there's nobody who understands Russia better than you. You have to come to the table, ma'am. I have been only in trenches all my life, believe me or not, including Vietnam. You cannot continue. You can have the spring offensive, you can keep having the winter offensive, you can go on this way. My recommendation is you have to find a table somewhere, maybe somewhere, I mean to say, whichever place you both feel like. There is nobody better than you.
Minister is now running out of time, so another question. There was one at the back. One there and one here.
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, I just wanted to know that you mentioned in your address that women do have shared a disproportionate burden of this war. So I wanted to know the ground reality apart from the military aid and other aid that the world is providing to Ukraine. What is the ground reality that the other countries, like how other countries are aiding Ukraine in fighting the crisis that vulnerable sections and women are suffering there?
I actually didn't get the question, sorry. I didn't get the question, sorry.
Like, women do have shared a disproportionate burden of this war. So like I just wanted to know that how nations are helping the vulnerable sections of Ukraine. Like what is the ground reality of the aid apart from the other military artillery aids and all?
Humanitarian aid.
Humanitarian aids. So I just wanted to know the ground reality.
And the last question there.
Good evening, Your Excellency. You spoke about the movement of women and children since the onset of the war. I would just like to know your assessment of the situation now, and do you expect an early return of the people who have left Ukraine?
Yeah.
Minister, the floor.
Well, this is the final round of questions, and I will have to go. The first that comes from respective soldier, with due respect what you did in Vietnam and what you have been facing, and when you say that we are the nation that understands better Russians, with all due respect with your words, I can disagree, because when someone comes to rape you or kill you, what kind of possible language can you find to talk to? I can hardly imagine myself that someone who has been raped, and we have these cases, for example, when an 11-year-old boy, and I was really impressed. I couldn't talk for a couple of days when I've heard this story. When an 11-year-old boy was raped in front of his mother, and he lost his ability to speak, and then the only way how he communicates with the world is drawing black lines on the paper. So I don't think that there is a room for proper language, as you say. Really, 24th of February changed everything. Even those Ukrainian people who were nostalgic to the Soviet Union, and this is a huge amount of people, they changed their perception of Russia. And what is unfortunate is that 70% of Russian people, because of the zombification and propaganda, they support Putin's crimes. When we receive intercepted conversations of Russian soldiers with their wives and mothers, do you know what these conversations are about? They are about what to steal from Ukrainian households. And what they steal, sometimes even the toilet bowls. And this is something that does not make it possible, at least for now. Of course, there will be a future. Of course, we will take some time to recover. Of course, Russia will have to compensate. There should be a very sincere process of Russian people to reveal their own crimes, to accept that they commit crime, because if they refuse and they still say that Putin is a great leader while killing Ukrainians, it will never go on, you know. There will be a huge distance between two nations. The humanitarian aid and assistance, yes, every single support is important. When we survived the most difficult winter in our history, and the winter in Ukraine is very severe, not like in India, we received a lot of generators. Medical needs are always we are very open for this assistance, and this is, by the way, what we also discussed, by having a very strong pharmacy industry in India. Clothes, product, in a kind of food, everything is much appreciated. And we have, I would say, thousands of and millions of money that have been accumulated within the United Nations agencies to deal with this humanitarian aid. because not only 8 Ukrainians left, but also 7 million of Ukrainians, they have resettled. So they moved from one cities to another, and it's a huge humanitarian challenge when they sometimes don't have basic things. One of the strategy of the Russian Federation during this winter was to actually freeze us, because they've been hitting directly the energy infrastructure, you know, the warming stations, and it was really, really a challenge because we didn't have electricity, we couldn't use elevator, you couldn't have water supply because at the, you know, multi-stored house dwellings, the elevator is not operational and the water supply cannot be there. So people have been putting the water in the bottles, you know, they have been washing in the bottles. I mean, I know that this reality sometimes might seem normal in different countries, but in Ukraine with 20 minus Celsius degrees of cold, it's really something that may put any person under the danger of life and death. So humanitarian assistance is really important, and here everything is needed. And the final question was, I think it's about...
Those who left Ukraine, when would they be returned?
I don't know, it was about... assessment. The situation on the ground and the assessment. Well, when you fight, you don't know what will be the result of this fight. You just dedicate yourself to what is needed. And as I said, this war is existential. So we don't pose the question. I mean, of course, we would want to stop this war. Really, it's the biggest dream of all of Ukrainians, of millions of Ukrainians, to come back home, for example, to hug your beloved ones, to live your normal life. It's my biggest dream to get rid of my phone and not to be like Robert 24/7 working for the government, because we have so many challenges that we have to face. We really want to live our normal life. But I don't think that it would be a matter of nearest future. And now the only thing that we think of is survival. My personal formula for Ukraine is survival, revival, and arrival. So when we survive, we will revive, obviously, and we really have a strong hope and believe that there will be a resolution of the war. And then the revival process, when Ukraine will reconstruct itself from the scratch, will also happen. And here India is also invited to participate in infrastructure projects, both for private and public companies. And arrival to the country that we dream of, which is a transparent, democratic country where everyone can feel himself or herself secured. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister. We come to the end of the questions.
Thank you. We have now come to the end of this discussion. I thank you all for joining us today. Please join us for high tea at the foyer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister.